Good morning, everyone. We will get started here in a few minutes. Just a second here. All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our virtual counselor workshop. We are so glad that you were able to join us today on this beautiful fall day in Ohio. My name is Faith Phillips, and I am the Director of Student Financial Services at Central Ohio Technical College and Ohio State Newark. And presenting with me today is Morley Keller with the National College Access Network, NCAN. And I am just going to tell you right now, we are going to rush through some of these slides or all of these slides. We have a lot of information we want to share with you. I am sure that you are all aware that there have been massive changes to the FAFSA form for the 24-25 year. So we've really added a lot of information to this presentation. We definitely welcome your questions. We would prefer or actually request that you put all of your questions in the Q&A and not in the chat. There are three of my colleagues, Jackie Adkins with OU Southern and Leanne Lamaster with OU Athens and Kim Jeffers with PNC Bank. They are anxiously waiting for your questions as we move through these slides. We are hopeful that we will have time for a live Q&A at the end of the presentation, but we are only scheduled to be here for 2 hours today, and we just have a lot of information to cover. So please go ahead and put your questions in the Q&A. This presentation is being brought to you by OASFA, which is a nonprofit organization comprised of financial aid professionals like myself. We are the outreach committee that is, again, a volunteer committee that has put this together for you. OASFA is providing you this information today as a free service to counselors. You do have permission to copy and distribute these materials, but I do want to remind you, you cannot charge or assess a fee for providing these materials to any of your families. If you at any point have any questions regarding this presentation or anything else about the financial aid process, please take advantage of the outreach email at outreach@oasfa.org. We have 4 people that are managing it and will be answering your questions as quickly as possible. I do see the question that popped up, where can we find the slides? This presentation is being recorded, and at some point later today or by the end of the week, we will put the recorded version of this presentation on the OASFA website under resources, under counselors, and we will add this slide deck to that recorded version once we get it put on the website. All right, let's get into this information here. This is our agenda. I'm not going to read it to you, but you can see based on the bulleted items there, we do have a lot to cover today. So let's start talking about, let's talk about, first of all, quick note. These screenshots that we have captured are as of the point in time that we put this presentation together, and they are not final and could change when the FAFSA is released in December. So just let's quickly talk, not quickly, there's no quickly talking about 24-25. Let's talk about some of these changes that we're going to be going through for 24-25. The FAFSA has not been released yet. You are all aware of that. It should have been released October 1, as it has been in years past. Right now, we are being told that the FAFSA will be released sometime in December of 23. This is a result of this massive overhaul that federal student aid has done to the FAFSA form, and that is what has delayed the opening of the FAFSA. Please encourage students to keep checking for FAFSA priority dates at each college. Remember, we tend to set these dates to get students to get that FAFSA done as quickly as possible. Many of colleges and universities have shifted those priority dates. So, for example, they may have typically used a February 1 date, and maybe they shifted it to February 15th. So encourage those students to check and continue to check for any updates in those priority dates. For FAFSA completion dates, they obviously should not begin until sometime in January. And this all, as we recognize, creates a very condensed time frame in doing the FAFSA submission, getting those FAFSA submission summaries, which is what the new name is for the SAR, getting verification and aid summaries or aid offers out to students. Oh, there we go. Okay. The FAFSA contains fewer questions, so they've removed certain questions related to taxable income. They've removed several untaxed income questions. One of the things we're not sure we're real happy about is they removed the question about requesting work study. So that doesn't mean that work study isn't still available at colleges and universities. It just means that we need to figure out a different way to determine who will be awarded that. The housing plan question has been removed. So when a student typically would name what college, for each college they would list their housing plan. That question has been eliminated. And the child support paid question has been eliminated. So we are still asking if a family received child support in a given year, but federal student aid is no longer asking if a family paid child support in a given year. We have new terminology. So the expected family contribution, the EFC, will be known as the Student Aid Index, or SAI, which actually is what it is. They're finally calling it what it is. It's an index or a figure that the financial aid office uses for aid eligibility determination. The student aid report, that SAR, will have the same information, but it will now be called a FAFSA submission summary. IRS data retrieval tool, IRS DRT, is now called a direct data exchange, and there is a change in how that process works. Parent and spouse is now going to be called a contributor, and we're going to talk about what a contributor is and who those contributors are in future slides. Or in this slide. Okay, so contributors are anybody that has to provide information on the FAFSA. So we know at the very minimum, we have a student contributor. If that student is married, their spouse is the other contributor for their FAFSA. If the student is a dependent student, their parent or parents are now contributors to the FAFSA. Other parent, if the parent of record is married. So you've got your parent, and then you've got the other parent. So it's either the other biological parent, or if the parent is divorced and remarried, it is the other parent. Contributors must provide the required information and sign respective sections on the FAFSA form. If you remember in 23-24, federal student aid added some questions at the very end regarding race, gender, and ethnicity. These questions have now been embedded as actual questions within the FAFSA form. These are still and only for demographic purposes. The answers will not be shared to state agencies or colleges. They have no bearing on a student's aid eligibility, and again, are for research purposes only. The student has to answer the question, but they can prefer not to answer for each question. And again, the information will not be sent to the colleges and universities by the process FAFSA, the ICER, nor will their answers show up on a FAFSA submission summary, and cannot be seen by parents or the student's spouse. So new this year is an IRS consent that is required. So in prior years, you remember we have stressed that that IRS data retrieval tool was optional. So a parent or student could choose to either use data retrieval tool to carry their information into the FAFSA form, or they could manually enter their information in. With the 24-25 FAFSA form, tax filers and non-tax filers are going to be required to provide consent. All contributors must provide this consent to have their federal tax information, that FTI, provided to the FAFSA form. And again, this includes non-filers, people without a Social Security number, and foreign tax filers. No consent to having tax information transferred to the FAFSA equals no federal Title IV aid. The IRS will confirm if federal tax information is available. And if the information is available, it will automatically be downloaded through that direct data exchange to the department to use in determining the student's financial aid eligibility. The IRS will also confirm if a person has submitted is a non-filer, which we are really hoping reduces the verification burden. Because if you remember, currently, if a parent states that they are a non-filer, and they're selected for verification, they had to get a statement from the IRS saying they were a non-filer. We are now told that this direct data exchange will tell us, will confirm that that person was a non-filer, and hopefully reduce that verification burden on the schools. The number of colleges on the form has increased from 10 to 20. So a student that does the web version of the FAFSA will be able to list up to 20 colleges and universities on that first submission of their FAFSA form. This is great for students that are really up in the air about that decision. So, and you can encourage these students to put colleges on there, even if they've not applied for admission to that college or had been admitted yet. So the student doesn't have to have applied for admission in order to put a college on their FAFSA form. So encourage those students to list as many colleges that they're just thinking about, so that those colleges will receive the FAFSA form. And then once the college has an admissions application to match up with it, then they can bring the FAFSA in and determine the student's eligibility. The number is still limited to 10, however, if the student chooses to do a paper FAFSA. Changes are also occurring to family size and how it is reported on the FAFSA form for 24-25. So the number in household, which is now being called family size, will align with the number of dependents that are reported on the family's 22 federal tax return. And this gets a little confusing because families may not remember what they claimed in 22, or that number may change and that household size or that family size may not agree with what the exemptions are. So let's kind of talk about this slide for a second because it is confusing. The FAFSA is going to initially tell the family that we are using your family size as the number that you reported on your 22 federal tax return, but they're not going to see this because that data exchange has not occurred. They're never going to see what those exemptions were, those dependents were that were reported on their return. So the FAFSA will ask the parent, is the parent's family size different from the number of individuals claimed on their 22 tax return? If the family feels confident that their exemptions are accurate, then they can say no, that the size is not different and they can move on, and the number of dependents reported will be the family size. However, if they do not feel that those dependents reported reflects their family size, they should say yes to this question. In that greenish there box where the little house is, the FAFSA is already calculating for the family what the family size is based on one, the student, and then based on the parent's marital size. So you see it's already adding it up. So it says, okay, you said the parents were married, so we know there's a parent one and another parent and the student. So you've got your parents' family size is currently 3. Now the family has the option to enter the number of children or other dependents who live with the parent and will receive more than half of their support from the parent in 24-25. Now they add that number down in that box where you see that blue circle. So don't be confused by that number 3 up in the box, and then there's a number 1 in the box below. It just hasn't updated the family size to show 4 in this case. So let's recap that. Family size equals the student, parent or parents or contributors. So if it's, a married parents, then you have the student plus the 2 parents plus the other children or dependents equals that family size. So let's talk about, again, this dependent student family size. It's the student and the student's parents who are already included. Then they can include the student's siblings if the following are true. They live with the student's parents, or it's okay if they live apart from them because they're enrolled in college. They receive more than half of their support from the student's parents, and they'll continue to receive that support in the coming award year. Then the parent can include other persons in that family size if they live with the student's parents. They receive more than half of their support from the student's parents, and they will continue to receive that support during the award year. For an independent student, the family size is, of course, at the very minimum, the student's spouse. If the student is married, that would already be included in that gray box. Then the student can add their dependent children if the following are true. They live with the student, they receive more than half of their support from the student, and they'll continue to receive that support. And then, like with the dependent student, other persons if the following are true. They live with the student. They receive more than half of their support from the student, and they'll continue to receive that support during the upcoming award year. All right, let's shift to the federal student aid ID. There's not a whole lot of changes here, but we always throw this in because we understand that this is sometimes as complicated as doing the FAFSA form. So federal student aid ID is the FSA ID, or the username and password, which gives the student and the parent access to federal student aid's online system, and it serves as their legal signature. The student and the parent, whose information will be on the FAFSA, need their own individual FSA IDs. So a student needs an FSA ID username and password, and the parent or parents need an FSA ID. Now, that's what's new this year, is we are telling all students and parents that if parents are married, both parents should go ahead and get this FSA ID, because that new consent is requiring everyone that has information, contributor basically, will need an FSA ID. There's a little bit of an exception to that, and we'll talk about that here in a few minutes. But to prevent confusion on who needs to get one, we have found that it's just easier to tell all students and parents, just have everybody get an FSA ID. If the parent has more than one student in college at the same time, each student will have their own FAFSA, and each student must need their own FSA ID. But the parent or parents that have an FSA ID will use their same FSA ID for each student that they are submitting a FAFSA for. Parents without a Social Security number, so undocumented parents, are now required to get an FSA ID. They will use that same website that everyone else is using to create an FSA ID, but they will have a different set of questions. If you remember, currently, those families, those parents without a Social Security number cannot get an FSA ID. So they were required to print a signature page at the end of the FAFSA form and sign it and mail it in. That signature page is no longer going to be available. And these parents without a Social Security number will be required to go to the FSA ID website. They will have a different set of questions that they will have to answer to confirm their identity, and then they will get a username and password. So let's talk about that a little bit further. So again, undocumented parents, this is new for 24-25. So non-Social Security number holders have a similar process to request an FSA ID. They will answer questions to verify their identity information pulled through a credit bureau. And what we've heard is it'll be that set of like those TransUnion questions. So for example, it'll ask you a question and give you 4 options. You know, in 1986, did you live on, Burgoyne or Primrose, and it will list and they'll have to select it. So they'll have to go through a series of those. This knowledge-based identity process is not yet available. We are waiting for that launch date, and we'll be able to tell families that are undocumented how to get that FSA ID when that's been released. All right, so let's reconfirm who needs to create an FSA ID. Anyone who is a contributor to the FAFSA form needs an FSA ID. So your student, your parent or parents, if you have both parents, or if the student is married, their spouse will now need to get an FSA ID. Important information to know about the FSA ID is all usernames and passwords must be different. Each user must create and manage their own FSA ID. Each user must use a separate email address and a mobile phone number. And we understand this may be a challenge for some parents. Not every parent has separate email addresses. Once an email address has been used in the creation of an FSA ID, it cannot be used again. Same thing with a mobile phone number. Once it's been used, the system knows it and it will not allow it to be used again. Remind high school students not to use their high school email when they're creating their FSA ID. Each Social Security number, mobile phone number, and email can be associated with only one account. So this is the screenshot that we have been given from FSA. So this is what we expect the new FAFSA to look like when it does go live in December. The one thing that we do really like on here is you will see that It's not going to have the 2 award years side by side as prominent as it does currently or has in the past, because we know that students that were completing the new form got confused and didn't know which FAFSA to fill out. So if you look underneath where it says start a new form or editing existing form, you'll see where it says need to access last year's form. You can do the 23-24 FAFSA form here. So it does separate the 2. When the, let's go back to FSA ID. Please, please, please tell your families, you don't have to change the slide, Morley, but tell those families to get that FSA ID at least 3 days before they start the FAFSA form. You will not be able to get an FSA ID on the same day that you go to do the FAFSA form, because it needs time to do that identity confirmation with the Social Security Administration database. So you should start pushing your families now if they've not gotten an FSA ID to start that process now. It's not year specific. So to go ahead and get the parent and the student's FSA IDs taken care of now so that when they're ready to start the FAFSA, they can log in. Okay, sorry about that, Morley. All right, so if they forgot to get it before they logged into the FAFSA, when they log into the FAFSA, they'll still have the option to create the FSA ID, but they won't be able to work on the FAFSA when they're in it. I may have jumped ahead of myself, but that's okay. So this is the creating the FSA ID application. So the student or parent will identify their name, social security number, date of birth, and the name must match as exactly as it is on their social security card, because it does go up against the Social Security Administration database to verify who they are. And so it needs to match the name as it appears on their social security card. They cannot include applicant name or date of birth in their username. They cannot use a username that's already been used by somebody else. So it will pop up if they use, you know, Faith 1995, it will pop up and say that that, you know, may have already been used. And then the password has very specific criteria, how many characteristics, and then it is case sensitive. Mobile phone account recovery. We want students to use, students and parents when creating this FSA ID to use their mobile phone, because that will help them regain their access to an account if they are locked out. The mobile phone is also used for that two-step verification process. So every time the student uses their login FSA ID, not only do they need to use their username and password, but they do have that two-factor authentication where they have to have a confirmation. And so if they use a mobile phone, they would get a code from a text message and carry it over for that two-factor or that two-step verification process. Then they would do the challenge questions where they will select their questions and put their answers down. Answers are not case sensitive. Please encourage families to write down what the question was that they selected and what their answer was, so that there's never any confusion if they get locked out what their challenge questions were, so that they can unlock a locked FSA ID. And then doing that verification of the mobile phone number where they're texted a code and they bring it back to the verification process. It's the same thing with their email address. Have them do that verification process where it sends them a code to the email and they bring it back. They can set up the authentication app. They can download the app. I don't know if this is necessary since you already have the mobile phone and the email address, but the app is available to use for that two-factor verification. If an email is provided, a confirmation email is sent that the FSA ID has been set up. And then all info, as I said earlier, is sent to the Social Security Administration for that confirmation. And it does take about 1 to 3 days for that to be reviewed. So until a contributor info is confirmed, they will not be able to use that FSA ID. So it is essential to request that FSA ID before they begin the FAFSA form at studentaid.gov. All right, let's shift to dependency status. We can make an assumption that most students coming out of high school, graduating, will be dependent students, meaning that the parent information will be provided, but that's not always the case. So let's talk about the dependency status questions. There is a new order of the questions. So it automatically knows based on their birth date, whether they're independent. The year in college, marital status is also asked earlier in the question. So those questions will already help answer some of those dependency questions. Remaining items listed, the student will be asked to check all that apply plus appropriate follow-ups, or that none of these apply. If they check that none apply, so those are the dependency status questions, and we'll look at those here in a second. They will complete the FAFSA as a dependent student, except if they would say, check the box that they are unaccompanied homeless youth or at risk for homelessness. If the student checks any of the questions, they will complete the FAFSA as an independent student. So dependent student equals parent or parents apply with the student. Independent student means that the student and spouse, if they're married, apply without parents' information. And new this year, the students have had an option, if they're determined to be independent, they've had the option to still add parents' information. Some colleges liked that additional information for institutional aid, for example. That's no longer an option. If a student is to be determined independent, they will not be able to provide any information regarding their parents. Then the dependency determination is also determined based on personal circumstances and other circumstances, which we'll discuss here in a second. But again, most high school students we recognize will be dependent for financial aid. So the dependency status questions are, the first one is age of 24 as of January 1 of the filing year. Makes a student independent. When the student begins the school year, what will their college level be? So will they be working on a master's degree or beyond, or are they an undergrad? Being a master's degree or higher makes them independent. Students' marital status at the time, if they're married when completing the FAFSA, the student will be independent. Veteran of the armed forces or currently in active duty, they are independent students. Students who have children or other people that they provide more than 50% of their support for are independent. Students who are orphans at any time since they turned 13 were an orphan, both no biological or adoptive parent is alive. Ward of the court at any time since they turned 13, they were a ward of the court, or in foster care at any time that they turned 13. An emancipated minor, or a student who is in a legal guardianship, not legal custody. Any check to any of those questions on the FAFSA would make the student independent, and parents' information would not be provided. Then the student is asked, if they say none apply, the student is then asked at any time on or after July 1 of 23, were you an unaccompanied youth and either homeless or self-supporting and at risk for homelessness? And if the student says yes to that, it automatically makes them independent. So they could be self-supporting and at risk of being homeless as determined by an emergency or transitional shelter, by a high school or school district homeless liaison or designee, by a director of a federal TRIO or Gear Up program. And if none of those, a financial aid administrator may make this determination after talking with the student that they are unaccompanied and homeless or at risk for homelessness. Then they will ask the student if they have unusual circumstances. So if the student selected none of these apply to those dependency determination questions, then they said no to the homeless youth question. They are then presented with this option to state whether or not they have unusual circumstances that prevent them from contacting their parents, or contacting them would put them at risk to get information for the FAFSA form. So examples would be the student left an abusive or threatening environment, they were abandoned but not adopted by anybody, a refugee or asylee separated from their parent in a foreign country, human trafficking victim, or if parents are incarcerated or otherwise unable to be contacted or located to complete the student's FAFSA. Then the student could say yes to having unusual circumstances. They complete the FAFSA then as an independent student. If they say no to this, that they do not have unusual circumstances, then the student will complete the FAFSA as a dependent student with parents' information. If the applicant does say yes to these unusual circumstances, unlike in the past, this FAFSA will calculate a student aid index and it will consider them provisionally independent. When the schools receive this FAFSA and they have a provisionally independent student, the school will then reach out to them and ask for supporting documentation of their unusual circumstance. So currently, if a student says they have unusual circumstances, it's an uncalculated EFC. It's sent to the school and the school works with the student to do what we call a dependency appeal or dependency override. That process will still take place. The only difference is that student is provisionally independent with a calculated student aid index, and the student will work with the school's financial aid administrator to review their statement and supporting documentation to determine if it warrants this unusual circumstance appeal to keep them as an independent student. Dependency documentation. Again, the college has the right to request supporting documents to support this student's dependency category. New, the college is required to reach out in these cases to get information and supporting documents from the student. Then there's that provisional independent status that will calculate the SAI, but they won't be eligible for aid until it is resolved by the college. And then once a student is independent, the student is anticipated to remain so unless the college has reason to believe that something changed. So currently, when a student has a dependency override, every year the college has to reach out and have them kind of go through either that full dependency override process or a shortened version of it. Now schools are allowed to anticipate independent status going forward unless they have reason to believe that something changed. So the answers from the 24-25 FAFSA will transfer to future FAFSAs and limit the need for the student to redocument those circumstances again in the future. Colleges therefore may seek defining documentation when reviewing these independent cases to really solidify their determination so that we feel comfortable that going forward that the student will be independent. Also somewhat new this year is the parent refusal. So there's always been this option where an otherwise dependent student may report that their parents are unwilling to provide information on the FAFSA, even though an unusual circumstance does not exist. This will now all take place primarily on the FAFSA form. The student can be considered for limited federal aid in the form of a loan. So if a parent, so the student cannot say that they have unusual circumstances of any kind that is preventing them from getting parents' information. The parent is simply refusing to provide information for the FAFSA. The student can move forward and submit the FAFSA, and the college can give them a direct unsubsidized loan only, and it can only be up to their grade level. So for freshmen, that's $5,500, $6,500 for sophomores, and $7,500 for juniors or seniors. If the student selects the parent refusal box, when parents do not provide that consent, a student aid index will not be calculated. The FAFSA will be sent to the schools, but a SAI will not be calculated. Please, when possible, working with parents who are refusing to help the student complete the FAFSA form, stress to them that this consent on the FAFSA form does not obligate them to pay for college. All they are doing is consenting to the FAFSA using their information to determine the student's eligibility for financial aid. After that, it is up, all of the obligation rests with the student to pay for their college expenses. And this is what the dependency status parent refusal question asks. Are the student's parents unwilling to provide information, but the student doesn't have an unusual circumstance that prevents them from contacting or obtaining the parent's information? If they say yes to this, it will allow them to submit the FAFSA. They'll still be considered a dependent student. This SAI will not be calculated, but the colleges will receive this refusal, will work with the student to get the appropriate documentation that they need, and then they can offer the student that unsubsidized student loan. Unusual versus special circumstances. New in the past, these terms were interchangeable. but now federal student aid is making them very clear. So an unusual circumstance is used for FAFSA completion, and it has to do with the student's dependency status and dependency determination. So do they have an unusual situation such as parent abandonment or human trafficking? Again, we commonly refer to it as a dependency override. The term special circumstances will be reserved for when a college does an adjustment to a student's cost of attendance or data elements that impact that student aid index calculation. So for example, a parent loses a job and the 22 tax information is not indicative of their current financial situation. If they present that special circumstance to the college can then use our professional judgment on a case-by-case basis to reevaluate the student's eligibility based on that special circumstance. And these are all determined by financial aid administrators and may differ slightly from college to college. All right, Morley, I think I'm going to turn this over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Faith. Appreciate all that. And again, just a reminder to everyone to please make sure to type your questions in the Q&A box. We've got 3 really highly qualified aid folks sitting there waiting to answer your questions, because we are going to plow through a lot of material and not sure that we're going to have time at the end for live question and answer. So please type all your questions in the Q&A box as we go through this presentation. We're now going to talk about, since we've been talking mostly about dependent students, parent contributors. The type of parents, when the student is dependent, this slide is really talking about, who is a contributor for a dependent student. So students who have parents who live together, and they could be married and living together or unmarried and living together, then both of those folks would be considered contributors to the student's form. The student could be in the situation where their parents have divorced or separated or widowed. And in the case of divorce or widowed, they may have remarried. So in that case, it would be their biological parent and the step parents' information that would need to be provided on the form. There are also situations where students may just have a single parent whose information needs to be on the form. That could be somebody who was never married, could be somebody who's widowed or divorced and has not remarried, or someone who is currently separated. And in the case of a widow, if one of the parents has died, the surviving parent is considered a single parent unless they have remarried. When it comes to which parent to be included or parents to be included on the FAFSA for 24-25, it has changed in the situation where the student has a divorced or separated parent. If they're married and living together, it's very clear that those people's information will go on the form. If they're unmarried and living together, both of those parents' information will go on the form. However, if the student's in a situation where they have a divorced or separated parent, there are going to be some questions on the form referred to as a parent wizard that are going to ask the student which parent provided the greater amount of financial support in the previous 12 months prior to filing this FAFSA. And that could even be the parent that the student does not live with. So they will identify which parent provides the most financial support. If they claim that it was an even amount of financial support, then federal student aid's guidance is that the parent who has the greater income and assets should be the one who completes the form on behalf of the student. All right, let's talk about the FAFSA and what happens, or how, once we have a dependent student, how do they invite their parent to be a contributor to the form? So as we know, when a dependent student logs in, they're going to click like they're going to start a 24-25 FAFSA, right? They're going to put in their FSA ID and their username and password to get into the form. As Faith mentioned earlier, you cannot get into an online form for 24-25 without an FSA ID. You cannot access the form. You can no longer type in demographic information about the student, like their name and social security number and date of birth, and access a FAFSA. That will not work in 24-25. The form will be very role-based. So once the student logs in, or if it's the parent first, whichever, either one can log in first. You're going to identify what role you play on this FAFSA, and that will then dictate the questions that are going to be presented to the student or to the parent, depending on who is logging in. New for this year, when the student starts the FAFSA for the first time, Federal Student Aid is going to have some information screens that the student can review and get information about the new FAFSA. I think this is one of those type of screens, or these screens, quite honestly, that probably can very quickly have continue clicked at the bottom as they move through the process. There's a screen that's going to talk about who is a contributor on the form. So again, more information for the student or the parent about being a contributor on the FAFSA. It's also going to talk a little bit about what to expect on the form as you're moving through it. And then the final one is going to give you a little bit of information about what happens after you submit the FAFSA. Please understand that these 4 screens will only have to be clicked through the very first time the student or the very first time the parent log into their section. If they log in and start their portion of the form and are unable to finish it and log out and come back the next day, for example, to log in, those 4 informational screens will not appear. They only appear the very first time that someone logs into their section of the form. When someone does log in, their identity information is going to appear on a screen. And so it's going to have their name, date of birth, social security number, email address, and mobile phone number. These fields will already be pre-filled in, and because they're being brought over with the student's FSA ID. The students cannot edit on the page, right, for these fields: name, social security number, date of birth, email address, and phone number. However, the next screen, which we don't have a shot here, is their home mailing address. If they have changed mailing addresses, they will be able to update that on the system right there as they're doing the FAFSA. You heard Faith talk about the new consent requirement. Here is what a portion of the page provides all the information about providing consent. There is a lot of language on this page. I'm sure there are folks who are going to read every word of it, but if you are working with a family and trying to advise them about what does giving consent mean, that light green highlighted box at the top is a summary of all the information that appears on the page about providing consent. What they're providing consent for, again, is just to allow their information to come over directly from the IRS, or a confirmation that they have no information available at the IRS to be brought over into the FAFSA. The very bottom part of the page, and it is a very long screen, they will have to click that approve button at the bottom. That is the equivalent of granting consent. If they do not grant consent, their experience through the remainder of the form will be different. They will be presented all the income questions except, and they will have to manually enter all the answers because you did not give consent for your information to come over from the IRS. So that will be a much longer process to anyone who does not grant consent. There will be reminders throughout the form that you didn't grant consent, and you'll have a chance at the very end before you want to submit the form to grant consent. So it is so critical because if the student and the parents do not grant consent in the case of a dependent student, they're not going to be eligible for federal student aid, and they're not going to have an SAI calculated, etc., until everybody grants consent on the form. The personal circumstances, the student has personal circumstances, the parents have personal circumstances. So, they're going to ask about marital status. And the only difference this year, these have always been on the FAFSA before, but they're now all broken out into an individual category, separated and divorced or not together any longer. So you can ask about or indicate the marital status, right? Then it's going to ask about the student's enrollment plans. And what will they be for the 24-25 year? All of our high school seniors do need to indicate that they were first year. They want to be treated like an incoming freshman for the 24-25 year. We know that a lot of students accumulate college credit while they're in high school and may, in many cases, amassed enough to be considered almost a sophomore when they walk into college next year. But for the financial aid purposes, they need to indicate that they are a freshman, so they will be treated like an incoming student. This screen will also ask if they already have their first bachelor's degree, and again, for our high school students, that's going to be a no. Then here is what the screenshot looks like. For those personal circumstances, the dependency status questions, here are all of those questions and the way they'll appear in the screen format. And if this does not apply to the student completing the form, then they will check the box at the bottom that none of these circumstances apply to them. And then the homeless question will appear. And so if the student is unaccompanied or at risk of being homeless, they would answer this yes. If not, they would click no and continue on through the form. Here is the unusual circumstances screen that we've seen before. So this is the order that you're now experiencing, the order that the students will see the screens. And so again, if they don't have unusual circumstances, they're going to answer no to be able to continue through the form. This is the parent refusal screen. So hopefully your students will not be in the situation where their parents will refuse to complete the form. So if that's not the situation, they can check no and again continue on through the form. This is where it's going to begin to determine and ask questions about the parents so that we know whose information is needed on the form. So here's the first question. Are your parents married to each other? If the answer is yes, the blue box tells you you're going to need to provide information for both of those parents on this form. Once you have indicated that you are dependent and that you're going to be providing a parent or parents' information, the student is going to be required to invite the parent into their FAFSA so that when the parent uses their FSA ID and logs in, they can be matched up with the student and complete their portion of the student's form. This is going to be difficult for a lot of our students because in order to invite their parent or parents, they have to put in the parent's full legal name, the date of birth, the parent's social security number if they have one. If not, they'll check the box there that says my parent doesn't have one, and an email address. If the student has to invite two parents into this form, the good news is if they know the information, at least just for one of the parents, and they get that in there, they will be able to click continue and move on through the form. You cannot skip this page if the student is dependent. If the information entered here is not exactly or does not exactly match what's in the FSA ID, when the parent logs in, they will not see any student FAFSA to complete. So if the student put, for example, the wrong birth date for a parent and the birth date does not match what's in the parent's FSA ID, when the parent logs in, they're not going to see the student's FAFSA, so they'll have nothing to complete. That means the student would have to go back in to their FAFSA and change the parent birth date to match what's in the FSA ID so that when the parent logs back in, they'll be able to see the student's FAFSA and be able to go in and complete the parent section of the form. This next section are the demographic questions, the race, gender, and ethnicity. So it's going to ask about the student's gender, male, female, or non-binary. The great news for students, if they don't care to share this information, is that every question in this section has a prefer not to answer option. So if a student does not want to provide any of the demographic information, they can simply click prefer not to answer. So they'll answer about gender, they will answer about race and ethnicity. And again, prefer not to answer will be an option all the way through this section of the form if the student doesn't care to share that demographic information. Then it will move on and ask them their citizenship status, if they're a U.S. citizen or national. If they're an eligible non-citizen, which we commonly refer to is that they have a green card. If they check eligible non-citizen, they'll be required to put their green card number in there. If they click not a U.S. citizen or an eligible non-citizen, they're going to receive a message about probably not being able to complete the form. It is going to ask the parent's education status. We do know this question has been revised and will be revised when the FAFSA comes out to be a little more specific about attending or receiving a degree, but the students will be able to answer that question, and they keep the don't know option is. So if the student is not sure of their parent education level, they're welcome to click the don't know option. There will be a question on every FAFSA about if a student's parent was killed in the line of duty. That is because there will be Pell Grant dollars available for those who answer yes to this question, and the institutions will have to verify the information, so they may need to collect some documentation from the student, but this question will appear on every FAFSA this year. It's also going to ask the student's high school completion status for most of our students. Again, hopefully a high school diploma, could be a GED, could be homeschooled. They'll indicate appropriately what their status will be in terms of their credentials starting the 24-25 school year. Again, then it's going to ask the student to get their high school information in there. This is so critical that we have them get it in there correctly, so that the lists that are provided by the state of Ohio for each school, where counselors can log in and see their list of students who have completed the form, we have to make sure that the students have correctly listed their high school. So they are going to want to put in state and city and use the search tool to help bring up the name of the high school, and then click on the name of the high school to make sure that they're coming out on the appropriate high school list. It's then going to move into the student finances section, and I think what most of us would consider good news here is that this is going to be a very short section for students, for everybody who has granted consent. You can see here that this screen contains all of the income questions that will be asked to a student who grants consent. It's simply going to ask if they had any amount of college scholarships, grants, or AmeriCorps benefits that they reported to the IRS, or did they have any foreign earned income exclusion. For our high school students, feeling pretty confident that those will be zeros. And that indeed is the end of the financial section in terms of income that a student will be asked when they've granted consent for their information to come over from the IRS. Students, if they are the ones that start the form, are going to see the asset questions. So it's going to ask about cash, savings, and checking, business and farm values, and also other types of investment, stocks, bonds, CDs, and things like that. Students will need to answer these questions. And the reason the student is seeing the asset question is, as we know, some families are exempt from reporting assets, and it's based on the family's adjusted gross income. Since the student is starting the form and we don't know the parent's adjusted gross income, they're going to see these asset questions. If this is a dependent student, when their parent comes in and their financial information comes into the form, if their income was below that $60,000 AGI mark, any answers to these questions that the student provided will not be used in the calculation. If the parent starts the form and the income is in there, when the student then is invited and logs in to do their section, if the family income was under $60,000, they won't even see these questions. So it sort of depends on which person starts the form. Then, of course, our students have to get their colleges in there where they would like to have this information sent. Again, it's all a search feature. They can go in there and be putting in states and names and cities and things like that, and do the search and find their colleges and click all the ones that they want to select to have added to their FAFSA. And as Faith mentioned earlier, starting for 24-25, they can do that up to 20 schools on their first go round. We think that that increase of up to 20 will cover probably about 99% of the students who apply to college have less than 20 college applications. So that should work for the bulk of students. There are always going to be a few on the extreme that may apply to more than 20. They'll have to list the first 20. Once their form is processed, they can go back in and add any schools beyond 20. Once they have their colleges in, they will be at the end of their section. They will have this review form. They can click the little down arrow and they can see all the questions and the answers. However, they're only going to see the questions and answers that they provided. They will not see any federal tax information that came over from the IRS. So they will see that nowhere on the form, nowhere on their FAFSA submission summary. So this will simply be the questions that they answered throughout the form. It will also tell them and confirm to them if they've invited any contributors to their form. So they will be able to see, and you'll see that it indicates invite sent. It is our understanding that it will be real time. As soon as the student fills in that parent information and the parent email address and progresses on to the next screen, that the email invite is going to be automatically sent at that point in time. Then there's going to be the signature page, again, kind of a long page for the student to run through and review. And then at the bottom, they will click that they agree to all the terms outlined above, and they will, in a sense, submit their section of the FAFSA. If the student started again, it is only submitting a section of the form. It is not the whole form being submitted. So this is the type of confirmation page that they will see. You're almost there. The student section is complete. But again, the reminder that an invitation has been sent to other contributors who are going to have to put information in the form before the FAFSA would be considered complete and being able to be submitted to federal student aid. This is an information page that they'll also see after they have signed it, to give them some additional information about the process. This screen shows a shot. These are not actual FAFSA screens, but this is a shot of what the email will look like that goes to a contributor. So it's going to give them a brief explanation. Probably the most critical box on here is the blue box at the bottom where it indicates log in. So a parent, if they're receiving the invite, or a student, if they're receiving an invite from their parent, once they click on this email, they can go right there and click on the login button. It'll take them directly into the FAFSA. The parent, assuming that the student finished the form and invited their parents, when the parent clicks, they're going to log in just like the student, putting in their FSA ID, username, and password. If they haven't created one as of yet, they can create it here, but it will be a different experience. They can do the FAFSA, but their FSA ID cannot be authenticated if they have a social security number, because it takes that 3 days that we mentioned. So if they create their FSA ID as they're attempting to finish their section of the FAFSA, again, they're going to get presented a whole manual path. They're going to get presented all the income questions and everything else, and they're going to have to type in all the answers manually. That's why it's so critical, and we want to deliver the message for people to please have their FSA ID set up before they start the FAFSA. So that is the best reason. After they log in, they'll have a page that pops up, and they're going to obviously want to click the Get Started button. They also are going to get the information screens like I mentioned. So there will be these information screens that the parents will, in a sense, click through to get to the actual FAFSA questions. So they'll see much of the same information the student did. Again, this is going to look really identical, except we're in the parent area. So the parent identity information is going to pop up on a screen. This is going to be the information from their FSA ID. They can't change it, but the screen that has their mailing address, if something is changed there, they will be able to change a mailing address, but they cannot change any of this information here. If something is changed, you can see in very tiny blue words at the bottom where it says account settings, they would have to click on that and basically go back into their FSA ID to change any of this information. And so here's what the mailing address screen looks like. This is what they can update if they want, and then continue on through the form. The consent page, basically totally identical to the student consent page. And at the bottom, we're going after that approve button being clicked. If they click the decline button, again, they'll get a manual process through the form, but the student will not have an SAI calculated, not eligible for federal student aid. So approve is the button that everyone is after. Then they are going to ask a few demographic questions about the parents. Okay, so again, the parent's marital status. So here are all the choices. Again, every status is individual so that they can click what the current marital status is of the parent who provided the most financial support in the previous 12 months in the case of separated or divorced, or for both parents if they are married or unmarried and living together. Then it has a few finance questions for the parents, but again, very, very limited. They will be asked if anyone in their house during 2022 or 2023 received any of these federal means tested benefit programs. We want to have a special note here that if you happen to be serving students in a district where 100% of the students in the district are eligible for free and reduced lunch, you are going to want to make sure they check the box on this screen. If you check any of the boxes on this screen, you will automatically be exempt from reporting any assets on the form. We do know in those districts where it's 100% free and reduced lunch that there probably are some families who have incomes outside the guidelines, the federal guidelines for free and reduced lunch. But this question asks, did they receive, not are you eligible for? So everyone is entitled, if they're in a district where there's a universal free and reduced lunch program, to check this box, and it will eliminate them having to provide any assets on the form. It will ask if their 2022 joint tax return was with their current spouse. We may have some people who change marital statuses pretty quickly, but we need to know if the tax return that we're going to bring over from 2022 is with the parent who's on the form and their current spouse. We saw the family size question that Faith spent some time on. If the number of exemptions claimed on the parent tax return is not an accurate reflection of the family size, here is the screen that the parent will need to use to add in that box at the bottom any additional people who should be counted in the family size that were not on the tax return. If you're unsure because you don't have your tax return with you, you don't remember how many exemptions you claimed, you probably want to just make sure that this screen reflects the total family size, so there's nothing wrong with manually answering this question if you're not sure about the number of exemptions that were claimed. The question about the number of people in the family who are in college is still on the form. What we do need to remind you is that this number in college is no longer used in the SAI formula. So our families who have multiple siblings in college are not going to receive any reduction in their SAI for having multiple siblings in college. The question is on here. They need to answer it. It is maybe, in some cases, might be used by the colleges to adjust their packaging strategies because we're going to have students who are currently in college who filed a FAFSA for this year, who have multiple siblings, and they're going to file next year and perhaps see a dramatic increase from their EFC this year to their SAI next year because the number in college was not used in dividing the SAI. So colleges will have this information in case they want to make any adjustments to those students who are going to feel the pinch of a much larger SAI, maybe without any increase in income due to the change in the formula. It is going to ask a couple of the questions that we saw in the students section about the grants and scholarships or the foreign earned income exclusion. The one additional financial question for parents is, did anyone receive an earned income tax credit on their 2022 tax return? So again, this screen right here contains all the income questions that a parent will answer when they grant consent. So again, the financial section, very, very short once you grant consent. Then parents will also will see the asset question based on the income that comes over from the IRS. So it will be happening very quickly, and the system will know if the family income was above the $60,000 to present the asset screen to the parent. If the income was below that, the parents may not see the asset question. We will remind you that this is where child support received is reported. So again, there'll be some sort of uneven guidelines. If you have to report assets, you will have to answer the child support question if you receive child support. If you are not required to report assets, but you receive child support, you will not see the question on the form, so you will not have to report it anywhere on the form. And then, you know, it's only sort of one parent logging in at a time. So they'll need to provide the information about the other parent if there is a two-parent household. If this person needs to be invited to grant consent, they will receive an invitation. The folks that will need both parents to have an FSA ID will be those unmarried parents living together or parents who did married filing separately. Those folks, each parent will need an FSA ID, each parent will need to log in, and each parent will need to grant consent, because you can only grant consent for information to come over from your own tax return. In the case where the parents are married filing jointly, only one parent does need to provide consent, because all the financial information is coming over only on one form. So whichever parent logs in is allowed to grant the consent for the information to come over. The other person, in a sense, does not necessarily need an FSA ID, but we encourage everyone to have one, because you never know which is the proactive parent, who's going to log in and who's going to take care of getting the student's FAFSA processed. Then the parents will move into their review page. Again, they'll click and they can see the drop boxes and they can see the questions that they answered. Please understand that you will only see the questions for your section. So in the review page, the parents will only see their sections. In the students review page, the students will only see their section, their questions. They cannot see each other's questions in the review process. And then again, the signature page, and you'll notice at the bottom here where it says sign and submit. Since the way that we went about teaching you this today is we had the dependent student who started the form and invited their parents, and the parents came in and completed the form. The parent is allowed to sign and actually submit the entire FAFSA for the student. So it's sort of like last person in will be the person who gets to hit the submit button. So if the parents started and invite the student and the student's the last one in, the student will get to hit submit. If students start and invite parents, parents are the last one in and finish it, they will be able to hit the submit button. When the parents do that, they will get a confirmation page telling them that the FAFSA form is complete, but this is not the standard confirmation page that we're used to at the end. Because the FAFSA belongs to the student's going to get a notification that their FAFSA was completed, and they are going to get the actual confirmation of the FAFSA being completed. So let's talk a little bit more about this student aid index. We have to learn the new words. SAI has to replace expected family contributions, so we have to forget EFC the best we can. The federal formula, as they have indicated, will create a broader use of the or broader need, higher need for students. The SAI formula is, as they indicate, a little more generous than the EFC formula. So it does indicate that more students will probably be eligible for Pell Grants than currently are. And those students who currently get smaller Pell Grants may be eligible for larger Pell Grants for the 24-25 year. The formula does reduce the number of income items and allowances. We talked at the beginning about it. It eliminates some of the taxed questions. It eliminates a bunch of the untaxed questions in the new formula. One of the changes is around assets in the new formula. In the past, if the student lived on a family farm, or there was a small business that had less than 100 employees, even if you had to report assets, you did not have to report the value of those small businesses or that family farm. That has changed. If you have to report assets, you will have to report the net value of your small business and the net value of your family farm. You do not have to include the home value on the family farm, but you have to include the net value of the family farm. I already mentioned that there's a new formula for family size, and it removes the number in college. When an SAI is calculated for next year, you may see students who on their FAFSA submission summary have a negative SAI. It can go as low as negative 1,500. Please know that once a student's SAI is 0 or below, that means that they'll be eligible for the maximum Pell Grant. You do not get a higher Pell Grant if you have a negative 1,500 SAI than you do if you have a 0 SAI. Also, if students, for example, colleges in the past have been able to prorate the SAI depending on the number of terms that the student was enrolling, and there's not going to be any more proration. So if you have a student who doesn't start in the fall and waits and starts in January, the SAI used to determine their need will be the full SAI. The institutions will not be able to reduce that because they were not enrolled for the entire year. As we indicated, more folks may be eligible for Pell, more folks may be eligible for larger Pels. Also, this year in the budget, for the Ohio College Opportunity Grant, the EFC was increased from $2,190 to $3,750. With that higher EFC used this year, SAI for next year, it does likely mean that more students will also qualify for the Ohio College Opportunity Grant. The direct data exchange that's coming over from the IRS is going to bring over their adjusted gross income, taxes paid, the number of dependents, and income earned from work. So that kind of information is automatically going to be transferred into the form. The FAFSA submission summary that students will receive once their FAFSA has been processed is going to look different than the student aid report currently does. It will be on several screens. If they're looking at it online, they will also have the ability to print this page. You can notice in the upper right-hand corner of this box where it says print this page, it actually means it will print the entire FAFSA submission summary. So the first thing, this will be the top and what they'll see on the first screen. It does have all the answers to the questions that the student and parents actually answered. It, again, as I mentioned, will not show anything from, that came over from the IRS. In the past, on the current student aid report, you would have probably seen a line item like would have said adjusted gross income. And if they used the IRS DRT, the answer column would have said transferred from the IRS. For 24-25, you were not even going to see the line of adjusted gross income. You're not going to see transferred from the IRS. It is literally not going to appear anywhere on the FAFSA submission summary. They can, like I said, print this if they need to use it for local scholarship applications for their own records, to share with their college access program, anything like that. They will be able to print it. It will have their estimated federal aid eligibility on it if they're going to be eligible for a Pell Grant or perhaps student loans, etc. It is going to share that with the student. It will have their student aid index on there. This is an example of one that has a negative student aid index, right? And then it's also going to be here where online they could click the drop down arrow and see every question and all the answers. But if they discover something, excuse me, is a mistake, they can make a correction starting right on their FAFSA submission summary. They don't have to log out and log back in, excuse me, about making a correction. They can do it right from their FAFSA submission summary. And of course, it's going to contain the information about the colleges that they listed on the form. It also will contain some information about their next steps. It does have some information and allows them to visit the college scorecard if they're looking for more information, etc. on about the colleges that they have listed. So it is a multi-screen FAFSA submission summary. And so the students will kind of need to click through the screens to see all of the information. Okay, that's a lot about the FAFSA. That's a lot about the FSAID, and it's a lot about the FAFSA submission summary. Let's kind of wrap this workshop up with talking about some federal and state aid programs and some other aspects of the financial aid process. You know, here are the primary federal aid programs: Pell Grant, the Teach Grant, the campus-based programs, which means federal work study and student loans. The federal Pell Grant for this year, for students who are in college for 23-24, if they had a 0 EFC, they received a $7,395 Pell Grant for this year. Next year, students may be eligible for a Pell Grant based on their SAI, but there's also going to be a new way using poverty tables. So a reminder that students can receive Pell Grants year-round. They can also receive it for up to 12 full-time semesters, right? And so there are lots of opportunities for students to receive Pell year-round, and they can have up to 6 years worth of Pell Grant. There are not going to be Pell Grant charts next year. With this new formula, what will happen is when the FAFSA is filed, it will look at the AGI reported for the parents. It's going to compare it to a poverty table and the limits that Congress set related to the poverty table. It will automatically be able to tell if a student's eligible for a minimum Pell Grant or a maximum Pell Grant. If so, that's the amount of Pell Grant the student will receive. If they do not hit the poverty table guidelines, then the SAI will be used to calculate their Pell Grant eligibility. We obviously don't know the maximum Pell Grant for next year, but the way the Pell Grant will be determined if you're using the SAI is that you would take the maximum Pell Grant and subtract the SAI and then round to the nearest $5. Also, colleges next year for 24-25 will need to adjust the Pell Grant based on the number of hours that the students enrolled. Currently, students receive full-time, three-quarter time, or half-time Pell Grants. Next year, it will be based on the actual number of hours that they are enrolled in, and even students who have less than half-time hours will be eligible for year-round Pell. Here's an example of the way that you would calculate their Pell Grant next year if they didn't meet the minimum or maximum amounts on the poverty chart. This is an example where we created that the Pell Grant is worth $7,850 next year. If their SAI was 1,002, we would subtract that from the Pell Grant. That would be 6,848. You round to the nearest 5. So this student's Pell Grant for 24-25 would be $6,850. So that's the way that it will be calculated, and there won't be a Pell Grant chart anymore. Here is information about what happens when the student is not enrolled full-time. You can see that if they took 7 hours, they're going to get 58% of their Pell Grant, right? If they take 11 hours, they're going to get, for example, 92% of the Pell Grant. So the colleges will have to calculate based on the number of credit hours that a student is enrolled for to determine their Pell Grant award for that term. The Teach Grant will still continue to be available. The maximum amount, it will be $3,772 for this year, because they do have, in a sense, a fee that is taken out of the Teach Grants. The service requirement upon graduation has to be met, which is teaching in high need subject area and high need poverty areas. If the student does not meet the service requirements, then that Teach Grant turns into an unsubsidized direct loan, and the student will have to pay it back. The federal SEOG program or the work study programs could be available at most campuses. Usually those are awarded to students who apply by the priority deadline dates. And as Faith made the point earlier, those are a moving target this year. So students want to make sure they understand what their priority deadline date is for their FAFSA, if their school has one, to make sure that it's in, so they can be considered for all the federal funds that are available at the campus. Work study jobs, it can be undergraduate or graduate students. Many colleges have some contracts with some off-campus employers, so the student may work on or off campus. The minimum wage right now is $10.10 an hour, so that's the least they can be paid per hour. There is a difference between the federal work study program, which the student has to demonstrate need for, and some campuses have work or employment opportunities on their aid award letters, but are not federal work study. The interest in the work study question, as Faith told you, was removed from the FAFSA. So colleges are going to have to figure out if the students that they're putting financial aid offers together for are interested in college work study. SEOG can range from $100 up to $4,000 a year. What we see is that most campuses attempt to stretch this money out. And so oftentimes you see SEOG awards $500, $600, $700, $800. You see very few that are $4,000 for students in that, so that campuses can stretch their dollars. When we talk about loans, the interest rate this year for students is 5.5%, right? And this will change every July 1. So we do not know yet what the interest rate will be next year for the subsidized or unsubsidized loans, but those will be available for the students. This is the chart for the amounts. As we know, incoming freshmen can borrow up to $5,500, second year students $6,500, and once they are at junior level or above, $7,500 a year. So that has not changed for a long time, and anticipate no changes next year for 24-25. There is the parent loan for undergraduate students, or PLUS loan. Parents of dependent students can borrow these dollars. It is limited to the amount of the cost of attendance minus any financial aid the student is receiving. Their interest rate is higher for this current year at 8.05%. They also have a loan fee that is taken out of the loan. Repayment for the parent begins 60 days after the full disbursement. So if a parent is borrowing a PLUS loan and the first disbursement goes out fall term and the second disbursement goes out spring term, likely in January, 60 days later, the parent must begin to repay the PLUS loan. Students get their grace period of 6 months after they leave college. So parents would be paying perhaps while the student is still in college, and you do have to complete a FAFSA to have a PLUS loan. In Ohio, we are fortunate to have a lot of aid programs. The Ohio College Opportunity Grant is our main large need-based program. Students use the FAFSA as the application. They have to be Ohio residents. Students have to be enrolled in degree granting programs at eligible institutions. And as I mentioned, the EFC can't exceed $3,750 for this year, and the household income cannot exceed $96,000. It is not available at our community colleges or our regional campuses. If they're at a public four-year main campus, their OCOG would be $3,200. If they're at a private nonprofit, it would be $4,700. And if they're at a proprietary institution, $1,850 for the year. A lot more information about these programs at highered.ohio.gov. We have other programs: the Safety Officers Memorial Fund, the Ohio War Orphans and Severely Disabled Veterans Children's Scholarship, Ohio National Guard, and the Nurse Education Assistance Loan Program. Here are some specifics about each of those with the definition of who qualifies for each of the programs. And I think the name in many cases kind of gives you an idea of the type of students that may be eligible to apply for these particular programs. Here are the amount of the programs for this current year. A couple of them cover 100% tuition at the public colleges, 83% of tuition for Ohio War Orphans at the public colleges, and $64.90 at private colleges. The Nursing Educational Assistance Loan Program, if you are going after an RN, you may have an award up to $1,650, or the nurse educators up to $6,000. Other aid programs may have some additional application requirements. Safety officers, they may need to submit eligibility documents to the college. War Orphans, the Nursing Loan Program at Ohio National Guard has a supplemental application they'll have to do. Ohio National Guard, obviously you have to serve in there. And for the nursing education program, you have to complete 4 years of post-graduation employment in Ohio for those funds. Let's talk a little bit about award letters. We're all filing the FAFSA to get to the point of aid offers being sent to the students so that they can help make up their mind. Know that colleges send them in varieties of ways, posting them in portals, emailing them. They may mail hard copies, etc. So students may receive their aid offers in various forms. We want to talk a little bit about what type of information we hope are contained on the aid offers. As you all know, there is no uniform template that colleges have to use. So award letters come out in different formats, but we do hope that they contain the cost of attendance so the student will understand the full cost. It will hopefully break out loans and grants and scholarships, and then also work study. We always want to have you remind students if they have work study in their aid offer that that's not normally something credited to their account. That's a job they'll have on or off campus and receive paychecks throughout the year, so it cannot really be used to pay their institutional bills. Colleges may give them a lot of information about breaking down gift aid or self-help options. Direct costs, as we know, oftentimes are the tuition or room and board if they're living on campus, and then the students have indirect costs, the books, the supplies, transportation. And so, colleges may, this is an example where they break it down by term so that you can see how much aid you have each term and then for the total year. So these are all going to look a little bit different. Some colleges will even do the math for the families where they'll put the cost of attendance or the build costs, they'll subtract the scholarships and grants, they'll let you know what it is, and then if you have student loans, so they can get it down to the bottom line of what the family may need to pay directly to the institution. At the bottom of the screen is an example of an institution that breaks down all the cost of attendance by category, so you can see exactly what they're estimating that the cost of attendance would be for the year. It's important, again, as we're working with students, having them look for keywords like scholarships or grants so that they understand those are funds that do not have to be repaid, that is, in a sense, gift aid or free money to help them pay for expenses. So we want to train them to look for keywords when they're reviewing their aid offers. We also want them to make sure that they understand the word loan when they're reviewing their packages to know how much they will be borrowing for that particular year. Some campuses, and we put it on here, even sometimes note that plus loan. We really caution against that. We want the plus loan to sort of be the loan of last resort that a family would need to utilize to help pay expenses. So again, just another way, available work study earnings is highlighted here. Again, that's a way to drive the point home that that is not something that's going to be able to be used to pay the bill. OASFA creates a cost comparison worksheet. This is up on the counselor resource page. You can use the QR code here. This is sometimes a tool that's handy to give to the students and parents so that as they get aid offers this spring, that they'll be able to compare them, break them down, and help determine exactly what the family costs will be for the individual colleges. OASFA has a lot of resources. The main page for our school counselors is oasfa.org/counselors. You can do things like request a presenter there if you're going to host a financial aid information night. We really want you, if you're not currently in our database, to put yourself in our database that's on that screen. And there are some resources there, but federal student aid, due to the delayed opening, has been really slow at putting out resources for 24-25. As they come out, we'll continue to load those onto the page. We also have a page for parents and students. Again, only has a few resources on it right now, but we will continue as those get released to load those pages up so that parents and students can find resources as well to help them with FAFSA completion. You can see some example of some of the things that we have up there now. The worksheet, the FAFSA completion tool by high school, information about the education and training voucher program, some things like that. So limited information there now, but it's getting added as things are coming out. Final thoughts. What I do want to do is indicate that there will be a paper form again this year. Over 99% of the people who file a FAFSA file electronically. So it's a very tiny number of folks who use the paper FAFSA, but who may need to use it. If we do have those undocumented parents or having trouble getting their FSA ID established, they may want to have the student and the parent section completed on a paper form and get that mailed in. We do know that process will be slower than the electronic processing. And even with a signed FAFSA, TransUnion will be doing some identity verification. And if they can't get the identity verified, there may be information sent requesting some documentation. Lots of things we're still waiting to learn. We do know, that the TransUnion questions will be online when setting up an FSA ID. They have released a list of documents for parents who do not have social security numbers that can't pass the online TransUnion question. So they may need to submit to federal student aid things like copies of a driver's license, a state ID, perhaps a utility bill, and another ID. What we haven't seen, or they never provided screenshots for, are what the screens look like for those who will receive that manual process. Perhaps that separated parent who can't bring over a joint tax return. We have not seen what those screenshots look like. We also know that the comment period just closed in October on the FAFSA, and we won't know until we see the live form if any of the questions that we shared today have been modified. We do know for families it may be a tough way to estimate the net worth of these family farms and small businesses that they've never had to report. We are also hoping, because so many people will be bringing over information from the IRS, that it is greatly going to reduce verification, we hope, or keep verification at a very minimal thought. And just one other reminder, again, these screenshots were released by federal student aid this fall and could not be actual final screenshots. As you get ready to prepare for the release of the FAFSA, you can run FSA ID workshops, right? And if you're hosting FSA ID workshops, you do probably want to make sure we're setting up FSA IDs for the right parent. So asking questions about which parent provided the greater amount of financial support in the previous 12 months if we're dealing with divorced or separated parents, right? Also identifying, that question on there that's now about unusual circumstances. Are you working with a student who may have unusual circumstances? So they will be answering yes to that question. And can we talk to them about beginning to gather some documentation, because we know every institution that receives that FAFSA is going to follow up and request some documentation of those unusual circumstances for that student. Also encouraging our students, if they're out and available, to work on the scholarship app so they can try to get all that information completed, so that when the FAFSA opens, they will be ready to roll with the FAFSA. Before we move into questions, we're going to move into some breaking news. Literally, while we were conducting this webinar this morning, federal student aid has announced the opening day for the FAFSA. It will be December 31st. So as we talked about, if you're going to provide FAFSA support, completion support, it will not be until they probably return to school in January. I think if you see the official announcement that comes out, it is worded by December 31st. What we are sure that I think everyone can bank on is that means that it will be December 31st. Don't want anyone to sit at their computer every day in December and try to find the 24-25 FAFSA. We do believe that will occur on the last day of December. That is the date it needs to open to meet the statutory requirements by law. So they are going to take it right up against the deadline for opening the form. The paper FAFSA should also be available on that day if for any reason you have families who would need that document. Okay, so at this time, please make sure if you have any questions, get them in the Q&A. Please don't post them in the chat. The chat is technically not being monitored for questions. So please, if you have any, put them in the Q&A box. I will say to our folks here, if you all want to come off mute, to those that are reviewing the questions, if there's anything that you think we need to ask out loud so the whole group hears that, please feel free to come off mute and ask questions for Faith and I, and we will attempt to answer those for the group.
Hi, Morley. It's Jackie.
Yes.
Had a question I wanted to verify that we received. For the students that are getting the 100% free lunch in their district,
Mm-hmm.
normally the section is skipped. They're not asked, it's auto skipped. Is that still, or do you know if that's still the case for the 24-25 FAFSA?
The 24-25 FAFSA will present in the parent section for every dependent student, and it will appear in the student section if the student happens to be an independent student. That question that showed the entire list of the federal benefits, of which free and reduced lunch was one of them, will appear on every FAFSA. It will, so if so, they will get a chance to answer that question. And if they check free and reduced lunch, what it means is they will not see the asset questions on the form.
Thank you. Couple things that ended up in Q&A. One of the questions was, and of course we couldn't answer back, but we've been responding in the Q&A, can everybody see those answers that we gave, or only the person that asked it?
I believe if they click on the Q&A and the box opens, I believe if they click on the answered column, they can see the questions, and they would have to click the little drop arrow to see the answer.
Okay.
Do we do answer live or type answer? I think we're not sure which way allows everyone to see.
I think typing answers, they can see it. Could someone put a message in the chat?
Yeah.
Can you click on the Q&A box if you are one of the attendees today, and let us know if you see columns at the top called open, answered, and dismissed. And if you clicked on the answered column, can you see the question, and can you see the answers that our experts typed in? Everyone can see. Okay. Yeah, it looks like everyone can see them. Okay. Are there other new questions in the Q&A we need to answer?
Someone did say they can't see the questions and answers, but they joined late. Would that have any reason they could
Yeah,
not?
you can't. Any questions that were asked before you joined, you wouldn't be able to see. You could only see.
Okay.
I am seeing a question about any updates on the top 5% of the class governor scholarships. I am not an expert on that new program. Are any of my other financial aid colleagues experts on what that new scholarship will look like for folks?
I have not heard anything new beyond what other folks probably already know. So Morley, you probably know just as much as I do at this point. I was searching this morning when someone asked this previously, just to see if there was any new information out there that I'd missed. I did attend an HEI training session earlier this week or last week, and I don't have any further information about what that's going to look like.
Okay. But it is designed for top 5%, and they do have to go to school in Ohio, right? Are the
Yes,
criteria?
that's correct. Yes, top 5% of the class, and they have to attend college in Ohio.
Okay.
We've had several ask about the slides in the PowerPoint. So
okay, we will repeat the recording will be posted on the OASFA Counselors Resource page along with the individual slide deck. We will put this under the heading on that page of FAFSA training, or line by line FAFSA training. So that will be the header, and this recording and a link to the recording and the slide deck will appear there. That will take a day or so for it to appear, but it will be there so that you can reach it at your fingertips.
There are a couple more questions in the Q&A. I'm not quite sure. This question is, who do our parents complain to about all of the changes that negatively affect the middle class?
Well, I would answer the question this way. Congress is who approves the legislation. So if you don't like or have concerns or want to raise issues or challenges about changes to the SAI formula, things that are now included or not included, you would want to reach out to local or federal Congress. So either your representative or your senator in your area that is a federal Congress member, this is actually, the formula is legal legislation and Congress has to approve it. So, you know, questions or concerns should be directed towards your federal representative or senator.
Morley, a few more that came up late in the chat. If a parent will not give consent, is there any reason for them to complete the FAFSA?
I would hope that we don't have parents who won't grant consent, but if for some reason they will not grant consent, but they're willing to finish the form, they should go ahead and answer it, because an unprocessed FAFSA is going to get sent to the college, and there's going to be continued outreach to the student and the family about, you know, we have your FAFSA, but we're not able to process aid because we don't have consent. You know, it'll be encouraging them to go back in and grant consent. So they're going to get encouraged to grant consent every which way they can. It's sort of like if a parent is not going to grant consent, it's almost like the example that we gave today. That's almost like parent refusal to complete the whole form. And so the only thing the student might be eligible for is an unsubsidized student loan. So we really hope that parents can be convinced to grant their consent, so that the student's eligibility for federal and state aid can be determined.
Thank you.
I see a, can we share the video with parents too? Absolutely, you're welcome to direct them to the resource page. And if a parent would like to sit and listen to this, great. Love to have them.
I'm sure, obviously Morley mentioned this too. You can also request a financial aid presenter if you feel that you want someone to come out to your school as well, to talk to parents and students about this, and that can be done from the OASFA side as well.
And then Morley, I don't think it was answered, the if a parent is widowed and their income comes from survivor benefits, was that answered?
No, it wasn't. I see that if a parent is widowed and their income comes from survivor benefits and retirement of the past spouse, how does that affect the award? What information will come over is any of these resources that the widow is receiving, anything that was on the tax return that was taxable is automatically going to come over. Any untaxed income, there are not questions on the form any longer about untaxed income. So if any of these benefits that the person is receiving are not taxed, they will not need to be reported on the form.
Morley, a question that came into chat. Can they refer to this Q&A after this presentation is complete?
This Q&A is being part of the recording.
Okay.
So it will be on the recording, but it will be at the end, obviously. Any additional questions? If not, thank you very much for being here today. We appreciate it. Hope you found this information helpful. Hope you will continue to use the OASFA Counselor resource page. I would say watch articles and announcements over the next few days, because I think everybody's going to hear about that December 31st date. And now you know what to tell your families in terms of when they can maybe expect to start the FAFSA for 24-25. As we have additional information, we will continue to load it on our resource page. And we will wish you all the best with this year's FAFSA season. Thank you.